Hello, and welcome to this recorded version of Knight Brolaire's writing challenge, Champion, a Record of Heroes and Villains. We have 3 entries, and we'll be starting with the entry from Blurred the Lines, which is titled Prelude. My heart raced, my hands trembled. A singular thought stood at the forefront in my mind. This is it. Footsteps echo off cobblestone walls as dim torchlight guides me ever closer to my target. A confrontation that would decide the course of history. The door at the end of the hall creeps ever closer with each step that I take. I stood before the door, my nerves surging even higher as I contemplated what lies on the other side. I tightly gripped the scabbard at my side for a moment, and threw open the door. And there he sat. The dark mastermind himself, Balmar. The room was more brightly lit than the corridor that had led to it, illuminated by a chandelier that hung from the ceiling. The room itself was barren, save for the lone chair he sat on. The only other feature in the room was a door on the far wall. The size of the room in comparison to the dearth of fixtures present gave off the impression he was expecting a fight. "I've been expecting you, hero." His tone was even and firm, an air of authority one would use with the strength and skill to back it up. "Let me guess, you're a chosen one sent by the gods to take down the villain plotting to put the gods under his thumb and bring chaos to all the land." The accuracy of his statement caught me off guard for a moment. Not exact, but close enough to be unsettling. I say nothing. A smirk spread across his face. "I'm right, aren't I?" Paused for a moment. "You see, some time ago, I once stood where you are right now." "Then why take up the path of villainy?" He stood up from his chair. "I could tell you of my past, stand here monologuing about what my plans really are. But in the grand scheme of things, it's ultimately pointless. You made up your mind long before you set foot in this place. You didn't come here because you thought I could be reasoned with. You came here to settle things. Everyone and everything telling you you're the hero in this story, that it's your destiny to set the world to rights and restore the balance. No. To you there is only one option. Fight." I grit my teeth. He kicks the chair away and draws his sword. "If we will not do battle with words, then it shall be with steel." I draw my sword in turn, tightly gripping the handle with both hands. Balmar leaps into the fight with a fast overhead swing. I barely have time to dodge, feeling the sword cut through the air as it sails past my face. I retaliate, but my strike is blocked. Another quick strike aimed at my neck, blocked in the nick of time. It takes all I have to keep on an even footing with him. Clang! 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 My awareness falls away with each swing of the sword, till all that remains of the world is clashing steel. Block, strike, dodge, strike, block, strike. The battle draws on, and breath runs ragged. He has to be getting tired as well. I just have to look for an opening. A strike comes in. I dodge. There! I lunge forward, striking out with my weapon. Flesh meets steel. A mortal wound. Balmar's sword clatters to the ground. "I've been bested." He crumples. I clean my blade and return it to its scabbard. "Good has won this day. Pray to the gods that they might forgive you." The mask he wore finally cracked. "You think the gods actually care for us? Why are we allowed to suffer at the hands of others while they look on from afar, unconcerned? How much blood has been spilled in the name of good versus evil? How much more need be spilled before they are placated? If they truly cared, why is evil allowed to exist in this world? Why do they not intervene?" Something about his tirade nagged at me. The words he spoke belied everything I'd ever heard of him. There was a kind of logic to them that was hard to shake. A difficult question to answer. "I see doubt in your eyes. If you truly wish to learn of my story, of what I set out to do, my journal is in the room beyond that door." He points to the closed door in question. Do with it what you will. Maybe you'll find a better way. I walk over to the door, cast one last look back, and go inside. Another room lay beyond, in stark contrast to the room behind it. Tables and chairs stacked with plates and eating utensils, crates and barrels likely holding food and drink piled along one of the walls. A bed sat alongside another wall, a small table serving it as its companion, with a candle sat near the bed on the table. On it sat a leather-bound book. I pick up the book and sit down at one of the tables and begin reading through its pages. The beginning pages spoke of him being chosen as a hero, tales of heroism and bravery, of saving the world. Tales of travelling the world to help those in need, tales of grief and loss, of frustrations and failure, how his anger turned him to study the past that it might help prepare for the future, studies into dark magic, the fabled sword deeming him unworthy, returning to the shrine, the self-same sword that now hung by my hip. He believed that an imbalance of darkness in the world would cause the sword to choose another hero to deal with it. He attempted to put his ideas into practice, but the royal court caught wind of his studies and demanded he cease immediately. Instead, he ended up butting heads and ultimately fleeing from the kingdom. I didn't need to read the rest. I already knew it. Beyond his personal accounts were notes of varying degrees, historical findings, research notes, magical studies and results. What I found on these pages would change everything. Next, we have a piece from yours truly, titled Blood in the Water. To the human population of Uthika, it seemed as if the foretold apocalypse of ancient legend was at hand, the streets stained red with the blood of both humans and angels alike. Primal prey instinct gripped those who remained, sending them to flight at the indescribable terror of it all. To the marines of the Mantis warriors, the scene was merely horrific, a bloody brawl, tooth and nail, for survival. The Carcharodon Astra had come to Uthika in almost full chapter strength, and set about the grim work for which their chapter was so infamous. A seemingly endless stream of drop pods had delivered the grey-clad hunters to the surface, and they had wasted no time since arrival. They had mowed down and ripped apart civilian and Planetary Defence Force members alike, sometimes with their bare hands, all the while silent as deepest ocean. When the Mantis warriors arrived, much of the damage was already done. The city was aflame, and drains blocked with bodies flooded the streets in blood. Vengeance had been forefront on the minds of the Mantis warriors, and they lashed out against the predators stalking the streets of their homeworld with immense abhorrence. Of course, the Carcharodons had expected such a response. Prey always fought hardest when its young were at stake. More and more warriors from each side poured into the city, each aware that the other would not rest until they lay dead. The ambush tactics that had served them well on Gargathria III found success here as well, and many of the Carcharodon hunter packs fell to well-placed explosives, storms of bolt of fire, or a hail of whirring chainswords. Yet for each Carcharodon slain, his brethren learned, his silent death passing on the knowledge of the Mantis warriors' guile. Before long, many Mantis warriors began to launch their own ambushes, only to find that they were leaping straight into the razor maw of the shark. Captain Arik, status report. The voice of Chapter Master Neotera cut through the Vox chatter, a beamed message from the fleet engaged in the skies above Utheka. The 3rd company is gone. 7th and 8th companies have taken more than 90% casualties. 1st and 5th companies hold with me for now. 1st Captain Borte is dead. Estimated casualties at 62%. The captain responded, ducking behind the fallen pillar he was crouched behind as a stream of bolter fire smashed into it. And the enemy? Hard to say, my lord. We cannot know how many of the foe have made planetfall, but it is fair to say we have killed many. His plasma pistol hissed as he launched 2 shots into the source of the bolt of fire. Understood, Captain. Continue the defense. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects, my lord. The Vox signal went dead, the cacophony of the ground-based Vox chatter fading back in. His 5th Company and the remnants of the 1st, 7th, and 8th Companies were holding their positions here, forming a ring around the city's main basilica. But the same could not be said of the remainder of his forces. His forces. The phrase sounded unusual even to him, but given the death of Captain Bautai, the 1st Company had ceded command to him. He would not betray the trust they had placed in him. They would drive these butchers from their homeworld. With that said, the situation was grim. The vanguard forces of the 6th and 8th Companies had been encircled and destroyed, a few lone marines of the 6th returning to the basilica. But now the sharks had smelled the blood in the water, swarm after swarm of them sweeping through the buildings around them, probing for any gaps in their defences through which they might strike. The 2nd and 9th Companies were doing an exemplary job in preventing such a strike, but at great cost. The 2nd Company had lost nearly 70% of their fighting strength, and while the heavy weapons of the 9th were excellent against those foes skulking behind cover for their time to strike, they were poorly equipped to defend themselves in close combat, especially considering the nature of their opponent. He gripped the hilt of his power sword tighter. They were on a ticking clock. When the 2nd Company was gone, the Carcharodons would surround them, and all would be lost. The forces with him were barely able to hold the Predators back, and so could not be sent to reinforce the 2nd. He ground his teeth, loosing off another burst of plasma. The superheated particles punched through the faceplate of an unlucky Carcharodon, his bolter falling to the ground from limp hands as the plasma singed the wall behind his head. It had to be now. There would be no reinforcements from the 4th or the 10th. They were engaged in repelling boarders in the fleet above. They had to strike, and drive them back before the 2nd fell. "All units, heed my command," he began, his voice cut off by a blinding teleportation flare mere meters from him. His helmet protected his eyes from the burning light, and when it had faded, his voice failed him. 30 grey, armoured Terminator warriors now stood among them, their lightning claws flashing with such ferocity that it cast their armour in a white glow. In the centre of this group stood a figure that towered over even the Terminator armoured warriors. Arik's head barely even reached the monster's waist. For a fraction of a second, silence reigned. The Carcharodons outside the perimeter ceased fire. The Mantis warriors inside began to turn to face the new threat, while the great, ashen Terminator champion turned his head to face Captain Arik. And then, as suddenly as it had ended, chaos erupted once again. The Terminators barreled outwards with illogical speed for warriors armoured in tactical dreadnought suits, their lightning claws tracing glowing lines through the night air as they severed and lacerated, spattering their armour plates red. Bolter rounds boomed against their armour to no effect, failing to even slow the assault as they ripped apart 1st Company veterans and 5th Company regulars alike. As his Terminators scattered, the largest one whipped towards Captain Arik. As he moved, his lightning claws flicked down and spark a light, the chain fists on the underside of his arms whirring into life. Sergeant Deloga and the members of his squad moved to intercept the charging giant, their own weapons sparking and roaring to life. A flamer doused the monster in a gout of fire, consuming him in molten promethium, and still he advanced undeterred. A stab of a claw obliterated the torso of the flamer-wielding marine with a sickening crunch, his upper body turned to so much shrapnel and red mist. He parried a chainsword between the prongs of his other claw without so much as a glance, driving the undermounted chain blade into the mouth grill of the wielder. Lifeblood plumed high as the helmet split in two, the corpse falling to the ground with a shudder. A follow-up swipe cut right through another chainsword, the blow losing no momentum as it bisected the wielder, the twin halves of the corpse launched aside by the force of the impact. Arik was paralysed in horror for a microsecond, psycho-conditioned responses quickly quashing his mental resistance to the events unfolding in front of him. He raised his plasma pistol as the monster drove both claws through the body of Sergeant Gloger, tearing him into meaty chunks with a spread of his arms. Before the pieces had even hit the ground, the Terminator was heading towards him again. He squeezed the trigger, and yet nothing happened. He stood, stunned for a moment, as if the right arm holding the plasma pistol split into several pieces, a rapidly staunching spurt of blood flowing from his new stump. He leapt back, whirling his power sword in his remaining hand. His foe stood perfectly still for a second, regarding him through jet-black lenses. The armour he wore was ancient, adorned all over by skulls and razor teeth of myriad predators. Some of these teeth were worked into the metal cowl that long surrounded the Terminator's helmet, giving the impression of looking into the mouth of some long-extinct predator. With a motion, he deactivated the claw upon his right arm, the chainsaw whirring down too. Captain Henri could not help but smirk. Honour amongst predators, he thought, lashing out with the power sword. A flick of the Terminator's wrist sent his sword arm sailing over the great armoured shoulder. Oh, shit, he thought, watching the arm fly away. He ignored the heads-up display warnings telling him he was dead, launching bodily forward through the warrior's guard. He slammed his own armoured forehead into that of the Terminator, the impact knocking the sense from him in exchange for a small dent upon the breastplate. He fell to his knees in front of the giant. The Terminator nodded slightly, before swiping a single, crackling talon across the throat of the stunned Marine. His head rolled from his shoulders, his body falling backwards without impetus to support it. Without delay, the Terminator turned and charged back into the slaughter, the Vox bead in a severed helmet crackling with the noise of the 2nd and 9th Companies being overrun. The sharks had come, and they smelled the blood in the water. Our last entry is from Mira Gray, and it is titled Atlanta. 16 to 15. Soldier Field, Chicago. The NFC wildcard game. The Chicago crowd roared, and Michael Trubisky could sense the danger in the air. Across the field stood perhaps one of the hardest foes he'd faced in his young career, the Philadelphia Eagles. The Bears' in line was entrenched near midfield. Just a few good plays could let them kick a field goal for the win. But with less than a minute left, Chicago needed to work fast if they wanted to stop the defending champions. Trubisky threw. Incomplete. No. Couldn't make mistakes like that. Not now. His next pass was on the mark. Allen Robinson, ever the playmaker, took that one for a huge chunk of yardage. The next pass went right to him for another vital gain. 2nd down and 2, spiked the ball, stopped the clock, 3rd down. This wasn't close enough. One more play could do it. Chicago had time. Mere seconds. But still time to get a 1st down. Maybe even throw one for a touchdown. Trubisky went for the latter, throwing the ball towards Anthony Miller, the rookie receiver who was streaking up the Miller. There was too much power in that throw. The ball sailed over Miller's head. 4th down. The field goal was the only option. Chicago nearly breathed easy again when Cody Parkey's kick flew through the goalposts. But the former champions wouldn't go down without a fight. A whistle interrupted what should have been a celebration. Timeout, Philly. That kick wouldn't count. Parkey readied himself again. One simple kick from 43 yards away to win Chicago's first playoff game in nearly a decade. He squared up as the ball was snapped and unleashed his kick, while the nation held its collective breath. Hung in the air for far too long. Players and fans alike. Nobody could bear to watch it. One final shot as the clock ticked down. Clang. The instant leather hit metal, and the city's hearts broke. Against Detroit, a stunning 4 of Parkey's kicks had hit the uprights. But Chicago had won that game. They were not winning this one. The ball bounced clean off the metal bars, and, having the audacity to hit the crossbar on the way down, landed in the end zone below. No good. How cruel was fate that a group of players so utterly dominant should be humbled and beaten in something as freakishly unexpected as this. Yet the mighty monsters of the Midway would fall, and the Eagles climbed over them in search of their lost glory. Final score, Philadelphia 16, Chicago 15. 20-14. Mercedes-Benz Superdome, New Orleans. NFC Divisional Playoffs. Nick Foles stood in the city of New Orleans, at the center of the famed Mercedes-Benz Superdome. Merely a year ago, the Eagles quarterback had engineered Philadelphia's greatest triumph, the city's first Super Bowl title. He had entered as a washed-up substitute trying to take an already stellar team as far as possible. But he'd turned in decent performances, and then followed those up with even greater outings. And in the end, he stood lifting the shining silver trophy that every team aspired to hold. That was a year ago. Now he held the reins of a wounded giant. Just as last year, he'd watched his starting quarterback, Carson Wentz, go down to injury. The team Foles now helmed was in much worse shape than the one he had led to a Lombardi trophy. It had taken all 17 weeks for Philadelphia to sneak their way into the playoffs, and even then they had needed help from the Chicago Bears to do so. And what a way to repay them. By some miracle, the football gods had smiled on Philadelphia. Or maybe it had been Travion Hester, wisely sticking his hand in the path of Cody Parkey's kick, knocking it inches off course and letting the Eagles escape Chicago with a win. That was last week. Now, in New Orleans, against a juggernaut of a Saints team, the clock ticking down on the final quarter of play, the Eagles trailed by 6. At the end of the first quarter, the deficit would have been laughable. Foles had taken quick advantage of Drew Brees' opening play interception, capitalizing on New Orleans' ineffectiveness. Foles had tossed a bomb cleanly into the hands of Jordan Matthews for Philly's first points. For their next score, he'd taken matters into their own hands, leaping over the blitzing defense from the 1-yard line, 14-0 to Philadelphia. That was almost an hour ago. New Orleans wasn't a city that went down without a fight. The minute the Saints got the ball back, they'd gone to work. Be it fake punts or fourth down conversions, New Orleans pulled out every hidden piece of their playbook. And just as much as Brees lit up the scoreboard, the Eagles had been snuffed out. The points under their name had changed not one bit since the end of that terrific first quarter. Chief among that lockdown was Nola's brilliant rising star, Marshawn Lattimore. The young cornerback had shut down Foles' best receivers, and had set up the Saints' incredible run when he'd intercepted Foles in the second quarter. And yet the Eagles were still in striking distance. They trailed by 6. All that they needed was one touchdown, and an extra point would give them the lead. Foles surveyed the field, catching a glimpse of Brees on the sideline. The two had lived in the same town when they were young, though Brees was now much older than Foles was. Both had led their teams to incredible Super Bowl wins, and now both were being asked to pull miracles out of their hats. The clock ticked down, and the ball was snapped. Foles dropped back, looking through the zone coverage for the one man he'd relied on all along, wide receiver Alshon Jeffrey. He'd caught a beautiful, high-arcing pass for a touchdown against New England in the Super Bowl last year, and he was being called upon, once again, to be the hero. Foles threw, a high ball, one that Jeffrey jumped up to grab. And that in that instant, Philadelphia's survival was left to the mercy of the gods. As Jeffrey tried to wrap his fingers around the ball, his grip faltered for a split second. It went right through his hands, erratically sailing behind him, and into the arms of Marshawn Lattimore. Intercepted. And just like that, as Alvin Kamara ran the clock down to 0, the miracle of the Eagles perished. Final score, New Orleans 20, Philadelphia 14. 23-23. The Mercedes-Benz Superdome, New Orleans, NFC Championship. Overtime. Drew Brees had found himself here once, 9 years ago. The National Football Conference Championship game. Then, it had been a surging Vikings team that Brees had beaten on an overtime field goal to advance to the Super Bowl. This time, it was the Los Angeles Rams and their young but surging quarterback Jared Goff. It was almost surprising to see these two teams here tied in overtime. New Orleans had put 13 points on the board early in the game. They'd held LA, the best defense in the league, to none. The crowd of the Superdome, famous for its incredibly loud, dominating atmosphere, swarmed Goff and his receivers, forcing drops, errant throws, and horrible reads. But the Rams were the Rams, and they would not be denied their scoring. A field goal had put LA on the board, and just when New Orleans thought they'd forced a punt, Johnny Hekker showed why he was one of the most versatile punters in the league, as Hekker calmly collected the snap he found Sam Shields streaking up the sideline for a 12-yard gain. They'd faked the punt, and soon after, LA's bruising halfback, Todd Gurley, had burst into the end zone from 6 yards out. The lead was now just 3. The two NFC powerhouses traded scores before another field goal by LA tied the game at 20. No matter. New Orleans just needed a field goal. They had time to drive down the field and chew clock along the way. When the Saints were deep in Rams territory with little over a minute, all they needed was a first down, and they could kick the game winner at the buzzer. And then it all fell apart. Facing a 3rd down and 7, Breeze threw short right. The play would forever go in the books as an incompletion intended for Tommy Lee Lewis. But it was more sinister than that. Long before Lewis had a chance to catch the ball, LA quarterback Nickel Roby Coleman had shoved him out of bounds. That should have been a penalty, pass interference, automatic first down. Except there was no flag. No little yellow piece of the cloth on the field to punish something so blindingly obvious. The resulting 4th down meant New Orleans had to kick it, but their fears were right. LA easily drove down their field, and the game-tying kick was easy money for Greg Zulian. Overtime. But the Saints had the ball. They just needed a touchdown to win it. When a few good penalty calls actually went their way, they were in a position to win. But these were the Saints, who had endured heartbreak after heartbreak. This was a team that had scored a miracle touchdown as time expired, only to miss the tying extra point. This was a team that had battled back from a 17-point deficit in the playoffs just a year ago, only to see everything wiped away when a single missed tackle on Stephon Diggs led to one of the most incredible game-winning touchdowns in history. These were the Saints, and their heartbreak would only continue. The tower began to crumble when halfback Mark Ingram was hit in the backfield. Ingram managed to spin away from the tackles, but in the wrong direction. A powerful Rams defensive line collapsed on him, and Aaron Donald brought him down for a 6-yard loss. On 2nd and 16, it was the Rams who made the play again. Dante Fowler, the defensive end who'd just been traded over from Jacksonville, reached his hand out and stifled Bree's throw to Michael Thomas. The ball sailed through the air, wobbling as it instead fell into the hands of John Johnson, the safety, for the interception, and the Rams took over. 9 years ago, Breeze had taken advantage of a late interception thrown by the legendary Brett Favre in order to win the NFC Championship. And now, if Zerlian hit the field goal, he'd be on the wrong end of a memory relived. This was a 57-yard field goal. It was considerably longer than Garrett Hartley's 40-yarder in 2009. It was far from an easy task, especially with all the pressure on Zerlian to kick it successfully. Zerlian, though, wasn't hailed as the best in the league for nothing. The ball was snapped, held in place, and Zerlian booted it hard, just like Hartley's kick that had sent New Orleans to the Super Bowl 9 years ago. Zerlian's kick sailed through the uprights. LA would play for the Lombardi, and the Saints were staying home, with only an off-season of reckoning ahead of them. Final score: Los Angeles 26, New Orleans 23. 10-3. Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Atlanta. The Super Bowl. The best offense in the league didn't look like it here. Here, in Atlanta, against the New England Patriots and the legendary Tom Brady, Jared Goff and the Rams looked lost, confused. The beginning of the 53rd Super Bowl had been a struggle for both teams. Brady, the greatest of all time and the winner of 5 Super Bowls, had looked shaky himself. He'd thrown a terrible pass that Nickel Roby Coleman had deflected and linebacker Corey Littleton had picked off. One of the most important things in football is capitalizing on takeaways. Los Angeles couldn't do that, as Todd Gurley, league leader in touchdown runs for the season, was stuffed time and time again. The Rams punted, New England punted, LA punted the football again, New England missed a field goal, and LA punted. Even after a scoreless first quarter came to a close, Los Angeles kept kicking it away. Only a Patriots field goal kept the halftime score from being a goose egg on both ends. 8 straight punts on 8 straight drives were all that filled LA's stat sheet. Los Angeles' defence held strong through the first half, and they'd had reason to hope when they'd driven close to scoring range in the third quarter. In an attempt to score, Goff looked to the man who'd been his safety valve throughout the game, wide receiver Brandon Cooks, the former Patriot. Cooks had run his route straight into the end zone on third down, but Goff's throw was late. Cooks barely got his hand on the ball before it was knocked away by speeding Jason McCourty. McCourty, who'd spent a season on a winless Cleveland Browns team while his twin Devin was winning Super Bowls, had finally reunited with his brother in New England. And Jason made perhaps the most vital play in the Super Bowl, saving a touchdown and forcing a Greg Zuerlein field goal. Tied game 3-3. And then, as if spurred on by McCourty's heroics, the sleeping giant awoke in the fourth quarter. New England pulled aces out of its sleeve, completing pass after pass. First it was Rob Gronkowski, who took on a pass through a bubble route for a massive 18 yards. At a time when chunk gains were like diamonds, Gronk's catch set the tone for the drive. Julian Edelman, the athletic wide receiver, caught one on the middle for 13 yards. Then Rex Burkhead caught one short to the left, setting the Patriots up on the Los Angeles 31. Here, Brady looked once again to Gronkowski, the burly yet lovable tight end who'd made so many clutch plays for New England in his 9-year career. Like threading cloth through a needle, Brady hit him perfectly for a 20-yard gain, as the trailing Corey Littleton could only hope to tackle him before he scored, down to the 2-yard line. Now it was the rookie's turn to shine. Sonny Michael, the first-year halfback who dazzled in college and somehow become even greater in the pros, had scored some incredible touchdowns in New England's payoff run. He just needed to secure one more. And he did just that. And now, trailing by a touchdown, Jared Goff had taken the Rams back into scoring range. This drive had shown exactly what the Rams had been in the regular season. Big plays and flashy throws had got LA to New England's 21-yard line. A touchdown here would tie the game again. But heartbreak always begets heartbreak. Just as the Rams' defense blitzed Drew Brees, the Patriots roughed Jared Goff. Duron Harmon, the safety who'd intercepted Nick Foles a year ago, disrupted Goff's throw, forcing a lame duck that went vaguely in the direction of Brandon Cooks. Unsurprisingly, it went behind him and into the hands of Stephon Gilmore, the leaping Patriots cornerback, intercepted at the 4-yard line. And that was it. New England tacked on an extra field goal, aided by runs from the Burkhead and Michael. Zuerlein missed a meaningless kick from 40 yards out, just to give the Wolves on Twitter even more meat on which to feast. The game was over, and New England had won. Tom Brady stood on the platform, his daughter in one arm and the Lombardi Trophy in the other. Surrounded by the team that had brought him here, he revelled in their success. A hard-fought victory was a victory all the same, and for the 6th time in Brady's 18-year-long career, the New England Patriots were the champions of the National Football League. New England 13, Los Angeles 3. Well, that brings us to the end of it. Hope you enjoyed listening to this, and there'll be another challenge probably in the winter time if you want to join that. So, this has been Brolaire, signing off.